Welcome to the podcast of heaven.
If anyone wants to know, it's in here. There's so much in here that is answered. If anyone is having questions, like so much is answered in the book. But the parallel of auras and all of these spiritual things like chakras and how this is not just a concept that is a new age concept, but it's a real part of being a soul and being of spirit. And it's in scripture.
It is scripture.
And I'd love to hear
art.
Yeah. I'd love to hear you share the metaphysical verses or the ones that point to this, which you've shared so much already.
Oh gosh, that would that would really be hard to share all of them.
But, anything that comes to mind.
As far as the recognition of the soul in the Bible, it's clearly apparent throughout all of scripture. He's constantly calling us to not look at what we see, but to walk in the spirit. So like, for example, I'll just do some real basic one that everyone can firmly get a grasp on. He said, do not prevent the little children from coming to me, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And he says, unless you have the faith of a child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, let's talk about that. How does a child see? Right? Well, in reality, a child hasn't gone through the sensory pruning process. And so we all come into this world as these souls, these beautiful, gorgeous souls who are absorbing their new environment, which is a physical one, right? But they are spiritual bodies learning how to operate in a physical world. We all come into the world with absolutely zero motor, none. And what happens as the soul begins to learn its body and where it is in relationship to its body and where its body is in relationship to the environment, that's what they call the vestibular system. As it begins to do that, it then begins to communicate with the proprioceptive system. And this is how the body begins to orient itself with its environment. But none of this is not like, this is part of development. It's not something that you come into the world with. You come into the world with a physical set of systems that still have to be programmed. Now, as you begin to do that, the way that your spirit learns where it is in its body and its environment is it's absorbing all of this information, all of this energy through its sensory synapses. And then once it starts to figure out where it is in space, that's the vestibular system, it begins the process of pruning sensory synapses. It decides which ones it doesn't need anymore. And when you have these pruned sensory synapses, then it begins the process of building motor pathways and integrating those in with the pruned synapses. And these guys with this severe non-speaking apraxic form of motor impairment, that sensory pruning process doesn't happen. So they are instead of developing into their physical body through those motor developments, the sensory synapse pruning doesn't happen. So they are still taking in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a child who is just developing, they are just beginning their motor processing. Their pruning has not fully happened. So they're still perceiving that spiritual world. That's why they have such huge faith. That's why they still see that everything, that they still see the spirit in the physical world. This is why little kids will see angels. And this is because they still have spiritual sight. God is constantly trying us to get to see with our spirit. The problem is we try to take a spiritual concept and put it into the box of a physical world. And it doesn't fit. And so then instead of thinking there's something wrong with our construct, we reject the idea of the spirituality that is greater than our physical limits.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for listening to the Podcast of Heaven. Email us at podcastofheaven@gmail.com. We're on Instagram and TikTok at Asher House Hope. Be sure to leave us a review on iTunes and listen to us everywhere podcasts are found. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.